The first thing I felt was the cashier's hand gently but firmly stopping me as I reached for a small cake. He leaned close to the counter, his voice a quiet whisper. "Are you Margaret Lawson? Ethan's mother?" I nodded, my own voice stuck in my throat. He then warned me about my daughter-in-law's family, saying they spent a lot of money but always asked my son for help. His eyes looked worried, like someone who had seen trouble for too long. Then he let go and continued scanning items as if nothing happened. I walked out into the cold Ohio wind, trying to catch my breath. The parking lot was noisy with cars and people. I should have gone straight to my son's car where he was waiting, but I felt a strong need to know more. I walked around the building and hid behind 2 green dumpsters that smelled like old oranges and cleaning stuff. From there, I could watch the front door without being seen and decide if the cashier's warning was true or just gossip. 2 minutes later, I saw Martin Hale, Clara's father, walk out of the store. He carried 3 shiny black bags that looked expensive, not like grocery bags. They had gold letters on them. He moved easily, not like someone struggling with bills. He pressed a button on his car keys, and a new light-coloured SUV flashed its lights. He carefully placed the bags in the trunk, like they were made of glass. Then he took a phone call, smiling like someone who believes everything will go their way. "I'm 68, a retired nurse from Columbus, and I have always been careful with money to make sure my son had what he needed. Ethan married Clara 3 years ago. I thought she was just shy when she joined our family. Her father was always polite and her mother always asked about my health, but then requests for money started coming to my son's door. They had stories about rent, medicine and car repairs, urgent problems that needed cash quickly. Ethan hates to see anyone suffer, and so do I." Now the cashier's whisper kept replaying in my mind. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just jealousy. Or maybe I had spent decades ignoring warning signs because peace felt safer than asking difficult questions. I stayed hidden until my legs started to hurt, watching and listening. I promised myself I wouldn't accuse anyone until I had enough proof. A secret was hidden nearby, like a quiet heartbeat under a blanket. All I had to do was find it. On the way home, Ethan asked if the cake was heavy. I forced a smile and said it was fine, but my mind kept going back to the cashier's words and the sight of Martin's shiny SUV. My son drove us towards Clara's neighborhood, humming softly, not knowing that his wife's family had just been shown in a different light. I kept looking at him, wondering how many extra hours he had worked that month to pay for another one of their emergencies. As the houses passed by the window, I thought of all the little things I had ignored before. There was the time Clara called me crying, saying her father's medicine was too expensive. I took $60 from my grocery money and put it in their mailbox that night. The next morning, while waiting for the bus, I saw Martin drive by in a sharp suit and polished shoes. He didn't look like a man burdened by illness at all. I told myself maybe the suit was borrowed or a gift. I didn't want to think badly of family. Another time, Clara stopped by my apartment and casually mentioned a dinner she and Ethan had at a fancy steakhouse downtown, where one plate cost more than my entire week's groceries. When I asked if it was for a birthday or a work event, she shrugged and said friends had invited them and insisted on paying. Later, looking through photos on my phone, I found her social media post from the same evening. She had written, "Treating Dad the way he deserves," with a photo of Martin holding a glass of wine. My heart felt a pang, but I told myself it must have been an old picture. Now, crouching behind dumpsters and replaying the cashier's words, those small inconsistencies piled up like bricks in a wall. How many times had I overlooked details because I wanted peace for my son's marriage? The new curtains in their living room, the expensive watch on Martin's wrist, the pearl earrings Clara claimed were fake. Each memory returned, sharp and clear. I could no longer pretend they didn't matter. Martin finished his call, put his phone in his jacket, and walked back into the store as if nothing unusual had happened. But the image of those shiny bags disappearing into the trunk of that SUV was burned into my mind. The cashier had been right about at least one thing. Something about this family's story didn't add up. And if I wanted to protect Ethan, I would have to keep watching, no matter how much the truth might hurt. The following Saturday, I told Ethan I wanted to visit the farmer's market. He offered to drive me, but I insisted I would take the bus. What I really wanted was time and space to follow my own plan. The image of Martin slipping into that shiny SUV was stuck in my mind. I needed more than just one quick look, more than one whispered warning. I needed to see for myself how he lived when he thought no one was watching. From the market, I walked 3 blocks to a small cafe with big windows that looked out onto the road. I ordered black coffee and waited. At noon, Martin's sleek SUV drove past. He didn't turn towards the hardware store where he claimed to work part-time. Instead, he pulled into the parking lot of the Dublin Country Club, a place so fancy I had only ever seen it in magazines at the dentist's office. The guard at the gate waved him through without a second thought. My chest felt tight. People struggling with debt don't casually walk into country clubs in nice jackets. I stayed there until he drove away 2 hours later, looking pleased, standing tall and confident, his face glowing like someone who had just made a big deal. He didn't have grocery bags this time, just a leather briefcase. When he passed me on the street corner, I quickly ducked behind a bus shelter, my heart pounding. He was humming a tune as if he didn't have a care in the world. That evening, as I walked home, the October air crisp in my lungs, I overheard 2 women outside a fancy shop. One, a grey-haired woman in a bright red scarf, said, "Did you see Clara last week at the mall? That emerald dress she wore must have cost at least $200. The other woman adjusted her glasses and replied, "And she bought those French beauty creams too. My granddaughter works there and says Clara is one of their best customers." I slowed down, listening closely. These weren't just women gossiping. Their voices showed the annoyance of neighbours who had seen too much. I hurried the last few blocks to my apartment, my pulse racing. The puzzle was becoming clearer. Clara's family asked Ethan for rent money, claimed unpaid bills and expensive medicine, but they still went to fancy shops, salons and country clubs like disguised royalty. My son's extra work hours, his tiredness, the dark circles under his eyes, he was paying for their fancy life. I pressed my hand against the cool metal railing outside my building and made a silent promise. I would no longer ignore my gut feelings. Whatever truth was hiding in plain sight, I was going to bring it into the light no matter how much it hurt. Would you like me to move straight into part 4, where Margaret finally steps into Clara's parents' home and sees the contradictions up close? 2 weeks later, the invitation came. Clara called Ethan on a Thursday evening, her voice sweet and sugary over the speakerphone. She said her parents wanted us over for Sunday lunch. "Nothing fancy," she said, "just a family meal." Ethan's face lit up like a boy asked to his first dance. I forced a smile even though my stomach felt uneasy. I had been collecting my suspicions like dry twigs, and I knew this visit might be the spark that set them on fire. On Sunday, Ethan drove us out of Columbus to a quiet neighbourhood in Dublin. The lawns were perfectly cut, leaves raked into neat piles, and porches swept clean. This was not the kind of place where people struggled to pay bills. Clara greeted us at the door wearing a silk blouse the colour of autumn leaves. She hugged me warmly, and the faint smell of expensive perfume clung to my coat. I had seen that perfume bottle once in a store window. Its price was almost half my grocery budget for the month. Inside, the house shined as if it had been set up for a magazine photo shoot. The living room walls had fresh paint, the floors gleamed, and a brand new leather sofa sat where the old fabric one used to be. Crystal vases filled with roses, too perfect to be store-bought, were placed on the tables. A huge flat-screen television, the kind I had only ever seen in appliance stores, took up one wall. I forced my lips into a polite smile, but inside, every detail screamed that something was wrong. "Mum, doesn't it look wonderful?" Ethan whispered proudly, as if his wife's family's wealth reflected well on him. I just nodded, too tired to argue. At the dining table, Martin poured us wine from a dark bottle with a gold label. I recognized it instantly. Just last week I had seen the same bottle at a specialty store, at least $60. A gift from a friend, Martin said when I asked. His smile was smooth and practiced. Clara's mother, Diane, brought in plates of roasted lamb, saffron rice, and expensive imported cheeses, all arranged like a feast from another world. We found some incredible discounts, she explained when I raised an eyebrow. Discounts again. Always discounts. As the meal continued, I kept my hands folded in my lap, watching every little thing. Clara's earrings caught the light. Real pearls, not fake like she had once claimed. Her nails were manicured in a style that cost more than my weekly medicine. The conversation lightly touched on Ethan's job, his long hours, and the small apartment he and Clara shared. Each time he mentioned working overtime, Clara's eyes flickered, and her parents quickly exchanged a look that most people would have missed. But I saw it. I always saw it. Halfway through dessert, a neighbour stopped by with a bottle of champagne. He greeted Martin with the kind of respect shown to someone important, not someone in trouble. My fork froze in mid-air. This was no struggling family barely keeping the lights on. This was a family living well, living off my son's hard work. When we left that afternoon, Ethan clasped my hand, beaming. "See, Mom, they're doing their best, aren't they wonderful?" I squeezed his fingers and forced a smile. But my chest ached. He couldn't see the truth yet, but I could. And I knew the day was coming when his illusions would shatter. 3 nights after that Sunday lunch, I sat at my kitchen table counting coins for my medicine when my phone buzzed. The number was unknown. I hesitated, then opened the message. It was a photo of a grocery receipt dated just 2 days earlier. The total was $572.86. The list included imported seafood, French cheeses, and 2 bottles of champagne at $90 each. At the bottom, the name was clearly printed, Martin Hale. Below the image, the sender had typed, "Mrs. Lawson, I thought you should see this." My throat went dry. I recognized the number. It belonged to the cashier who had warned me. I stared at the bright screen, my heart pounding. This was no rumor. This was proof. Clear and undeniable. The same Martin who had smiled at me over roasted lamb and stories of hardship was buying champagne like it was water. The next day, another message came, a receipt for nearly $600. Dated the same week Clara had called Ethan, sobbing about overdue rent. My stomach clenched. Each item on the list felt like a betrayal. Caviar, truffles, imported wine. I pressed the phone against my chest and closed my eyes. My son had worked double shifts that week. He had skipped dinners with friends, coming home with dark circles under his eyes, while Clara's family filled their cupboards with luxuries. It was as if fate wanted to make the truth undeniably clear. That evening, my landline rang. The voice on the other end was a woman I barely knew, Mrs. Delaney, who lived down the street from Clara's parents. She said she had gotten my number from a friend. Her voice trembled with anger. "Mrs. Lawson, you deserve to know. Last weekend they threw a birthday party for Martin. It was catered, hundreds of guests. They had professional chefs, imported wines, even an ice sculpture. People were whispering it must have cost thousands. Yet, your son told my daughter they were struggling with hospital bills." I listened, barely able to breathe. Each word hit me like a hammer hitting glass. The illusion I had tried to keep for Ethan shattered piece by piece. They weren't just bending the truth. They had built an entire theatre of lies, every excuse carefully planned. That night, Ethan stopped by after work. He looked exhausted, his shoulders heavy from the long hours. He told me Clara had mentioned another emergency, this time car repairs for her father. He sighed, saying he might need to use his savings. I reached across the table and held his hand. I wanted to blurt it all out, to show him the receipts glowing on my phone. But I stopped. His eyes were kind but tired, not ready for a fight. I knew then what had to happen. I needed more. Enough that even Ethan, blinded by love and loyalty, could not deny it. Proof so strong that the lies would crumble under its weight. The following Wednesday, Ethan arrived at my apartment after work. He looked worn, his tie crooked, his face pale from long hours. He sank into the chair across from me and rubbed his temples. "Clara just called," he mumbled. "Her dad needs another procedure. Insurance won't cover it. They need $200 by Friday." I felt the air leave my chest. The words were almost exactly what Clara had used last time. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. "Ethan," I said softly, "I need to show you something." He looked up, puzzled. I opened the photos the cashier had sent me. One by one, I placed the screen before him. The receipts glowed in the dim light of my kitchen. $400, $600, champagne, caviar, expensive groceries. Each dated on the same days his wife had claimed her family was desperate. At first he frowned. "Mum, these could be anyone's." "Look closer," I whispered. His eyes moved to the name printed at the bottom, Martin Hale. His jaw tightened. He scrolled through the next receipt, then the next. His voice cracked. "Where did you get these?" I told him about the cashier, about overhearing neighbours at the boutique, about the party Mrs. Delaney described. Every word was slow, careful, like walking on thin ice. Ethan's shoulders stiffened. "You mean to say Clara's family has lied for 2 years?" His voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. I didn't answer. I just let the evidence speak for itself. He stood, pacing the small room, running both hands through his hair. "No, there has to be another explanation. Maybe Dad had a good month. Maybe they borrowed." His voice trailed off, not convincing even himself. I wanted to reach for him, but I knew he needed space to let the realization sink in. "Son," I said gently, "I know you love Clara, but love should not make you blind. Look at the dates, look at the amounts. While you worked overtime, they feasted." His chest rose and fell quickly. Finally, he stopped pacing, his eyes wet. "I need to know for sure. I can't keep living in this fog." That night, after he left my apartment, Ethan went home and did something he had never done before. He searched through Clara's things. In the back of their closet, he found shiny shopping bags from fancy stores downtown. Inside were clothes still with price tags, jewellery tucked into velvet boxes, and then a spiral-bound notebook filled with Clara's neat handwriting. Page after page recorded every made-up emergency: rent, medicine, car repairs. Next to each line was the amount Ethan had sent. At the bottom of the last page was a new entry in bold: "Mum dental surgery. Next month $1,900. A note followed in the margin: "If he resists, remind him how much he owes us." When Ethan called me later that night, his voice was hollow. "Mum," he whispered, "it's worse than we thought. They kept records like it was a business." The next evening, Ethan asked Clara to sit with him in the living room. His voice was calm, but his hands trembled. He laid the ledger on the coffee table. The receipts I had given him were stacked neatly beside it. Clara's eyes flickered the moment she saw them. For a moment she froze, then forced a laugh. "Where did you find that old notebook? Those are just household notes." Ethan opened to a page labelled "Car Repairs, $650. "This date," he said quietly, "you told me your father's transmission broke. You cried on the phone until I wired the money. On this same day you spent nearly $700 on clothes. And here, hospital bills, $300. The very day Dad bought champagne." His voice shook, but his gaze never left hers. Clara's calm facade cracked. She leaned forward, her tone sharp. "You had no right to go through my things." "And you had no right to turn my life into an ATM, Ethan snapped. The words hung heavy in the room. Martin arrived minutes later, called in by Clara's urgent text. He walked in wearing a pressed shirt and that same confident smile. But when he saw the ledger, the receipts, and Ethan's pale face, his expression faltered. "Son, whatever this looks like, I can explain." "Then explain," Ethan demanded. Explain why every emergency lined up perfectly with shopping trips and parties. Explain why I have given over $15,000 in 2 years while your house keeps getting shinier. For a long moment, Martin said nothing. Then, with a sigh, he lowered himself into a chair. His tone changed, colder now, almost like a business deal. Because you made it easy. You wanted to be the hero, and we needed help. It was never personal, just practical. Clara's head whipped toward him. Dad, stop. But Ethan had heard enough. Not personal? He repeated, his voice breaking. I gave up nights of sleep, worked overtime, skipped vacations because I thought you were drowning. I thought I was saving my family. Clara's false front finally shattered. Fine, she spat, tears streaking her mascara. Yes, we lied. We knew you'd always say yes. My father told me from the start. You were perfect because you can't say no. You believed every word, and we lived better for it. Why should I apologize for being smarter than you? Ethan felt the ground shift beneath him. The woman he had married, the family he had trusted, had never seen him as a partner or a son-in-law, only as a source of money to tap again and again until nothing was left. He stood, his voice firm, though his heart was breaking. This marriage is over. I will not live as your victim one more day. That night, Ethan packed a single duffel bag and left his apartment. Clara followed him to the door, her sobs loud enough to disturb the neighbours, but her words were filled with anger. You will regret this, Ethan. You'll never find someone who gives you what I do. He paused only long enough to answer, I already regret ever believing you. Then he walked out into the cold Ohio night, the ledger still under his arm like a piece of evidence too heavy to drop. The days that followed blurred into court papers, meetings with lawyers and long silences where Ethan tried to rebuild his broken trust. Clara fought back at first, insisting the receipts were fake and the ledger misunderstood, but Martin's careless admission and the photographs I held made her defense fall apart. By the time the divorce began, their tactics had changed from denying to desperate. They begged, they made deals, they promised to return every cent. Ethan never looked back. When the lawyers added everything up, the total amount taken from him reached just over $20,000. That number felt like a knife twisting in his chest. It represented months of lost sleep, years of overtime, and countless sacrifices he could never get back. Yet as painful as the money was, the real wound was knowing his kindness had been used against him, turned into someone else's luxury. Clara tried one last act. She arrived at my apartment unannounced one afternoon, wearing plain clothes and no makeup, her voice trembling as she pleaded, Adeline, please talk to Ethan. Tell him not to hate me. I was desperate. I met her gaze, calm and steady. Desperation does not throw champagne parties, Clara. Desperation does not wear silk and pearls while begging for rent money. You were not desperate. You were entitled. She left with no more tears, only a cold stare that told me the mask had finally slipped. Ethan moved into a small apartment near his job. The walls were bare, the furniture simple, but there was a strange feeling of relief in the emptiness. No more lies waiting at the door. No more emergencies made up out of thin air. He came to me often for dinner, and though his eyes still carried shadows, I could see light returning. Months later, the divorce was final. Clara vanished from Columbus with her parents. Their departure was quiet and quick. Neighbours whispered about debt collectors and unpaid bills, but I no longer cared. What mattered was that Ethan was free. One evening, as we shared stew at my kitchen table, he took my hand and said, Mum, I should feel broken, but I feel lighter. They stole my money, but you saved my life. His words filled me with both sadness and pride. He had been hurt, but he was stronger for surviving. The story did not end with loss. It ended with a new beginning. My son stepping forward, scarred but free, ready to rebuild a life no one could fake again. When I look back on everything, I realize the greatest pain was not the money lost, but the trust that was broken. My son believed he was helping family, but in truth he was being used, and I, as his mother, had to find the courage to show him what he couldn't yet see. It taught me that kindness without careful thought can lead to being manipulated. Love should never demand blindness, and true family never hides behind lies. By speaking up, I may have broken his heart, but I also saved him from many more years of deception. Now he sees things more clearly, and I feel proud knowing we faced the truth together. What about you? What lesson do you take from this story? And which city are you watching from right now? Share your thoughts. I read every single one,